Welcome to The Purple Door, a podcast for young women by young women, with your host, Shanique Lowndes. Each week, we deliver the best hard-hitting analysis of topical issues that affect young women and how they deal with them. For today's episode, we have a very interesting, very exciting topic. But before I tell you what that is, I'm going to allow the 5 beautiful ladies that are accompanying me this afternoon to introduce themselves.
I'm Kimarley Walker Medley.
Cheryl Ann Thomas Scott.
I'm Crystal Ramatar.
Alvanel Dennis.
Roxanne McCoy Chambers.
And of course, I'm Shanique Lowndes. We are going to be discussing some of the negatives that are out there about sex and what really is God's ideal, because sex is something that is very pervasive and everybody has something to say about it. So we're going to be hearing from our young ladies what they've heard, what are their ideas about it, and where do we identify what God's intention for sex really is and how we experience that in our lives as Christian women.
Growing up, I was told that we young women should remain virgins, wait on our husbands, yada yada yada. Just as how we were grown to take care of the household, so were boys raised to go out. We're all human, so our sexual nature is going to come out at some point, and males tend to have sex at an earlier age, and if not, they're sometimes embarrassed about it. Because I had a friend, a really good friend, who was a virgin, right? He told me once. He actually didn't realize that he was telling me. So after which, I was there. I didn't laugh because I thought it was an accomplishment for a young man to be a virgin. So one of his friends were teasing him and saying, you're with Avenel for X and Y, and I know you can't get the na. And it was like all over social media, Snap, everything. So he went back into a state where I was like, are you still, we ended up stop talking. I was like, are you still a virgin? Who said me a virgin? You did something. Me never tell you that. I say, where is that coming from? It's something you should be proud of. But just as how the ideal is that a young lady should be a virgin, I believe that a young man should also wait for his wife.
Okay, so for me, I'm with Avanel with the fact that we should all be virgins, right? As young people, we're faced with many temptations, and sex is one of the biggest one, because it is up in our face every single day. It's everywhere, because when you have advertisement, it is there. When you're at school, they're talking about it. Person might be watching pornography and so forth and so on. So it is all over the place. But God wants us to live a pure life. Yes, He wants us to live a pure life, and He has instituted marriage for us to. That is really the cure for it. If we want to have sex, that is where we should be. We should get married so we can have as much as possible that we want. I'm not saying that we should overdo it, but you have to enjoy it.
Based on the 2 experiences that were shared, I get the impression that you feel that you fall in a group that is the minority, right? That is not the welcome and accepted view, and the same expectations for the women should be that of the men. As a result of that, there's not a lot of confidence. How do I have this stance without feeling odd? What do I do when I have these emotions or have these feelings? And put a value on life without feeling worried about it or feeling like I'm odd and not doing the right thing. I think the best thing would be for us to first define what sex is and how it is supposed to be dealt with and who should be engaged in having sex.
If we are just being straightforward, as early as, I would say, maybe primary school, or maybe even before that, we are taught what sex is. Sex, yes, at least, the general stance. So, a man and a woman come together and they put the penis in the vagina and they do an act, and that's sex, and that's something we learn very early. As little as we are, we learn that, and even if we don't thoroughly understand that, we are taught that. So that's what sex is. But I think society and over time and our culture has taught us that that act in and of itself is negative somehow, and we are a bit afraid of it, or we're so intrigued by it because we're not supposed to do it, that we end up doing it before we should do it. And I think that's negative
View of
that
it.
negative view of it. It's almost like this veil that's put over it. It doesn't need to be torn apart so we can see it, and at the same time, it's not something that we need to fear at all. It's something that God has created. He created it. It's one of the very first acts that's discussed in the Bible, funny enough. It's very early in Genesis that is taught, mentioned. The man and the woman were both naked and they weren't ashamed. And clearly, that act was something that was done. It was of God. That's what he wanted. And so, as women, young women, we definitely should be confident that is something that we can aspire to, and there's nothing wrong to aspire to one day having sex. But at the same time, we don't need to be, say me I have sex. Yeah, man, I reach certain age and I can't wait till I get married because I have sex.
And have a lot of it.
And a lot of it, like rabbits. No, instead, it is something that, yes, we can aspire to it, but at the same time, not overly be so zealous to have sex.
Separating all of it.
Yeah.
I realize in my state now, there's something about sex that was not portrayed to me as a child. That sex is not something that you cannot dissect. In order for you to really benefit from it, you have to take a holistic approach. Yes. And so growing up, when the dogs having sex, we say they stone them, and then we hear all of these songs about jump and this and that. So you get so many different phases, and in all of it, the sum total of it is that it is just this physiological act, right? And so we find as children, you heard that 2 children were behind a door and they did this and they did that. And so here is it, you have all of these emotions that are activated by whether the music you listen to, the movies you watch, and you find yourself helpless and you get behind a door and you just do it. And you find that this thing is not even benefiting you. And so you have 2 reactions. You turn away from it and you totally shun it and you see it as this nasty behavior that cannot be discussed, and you just shun it. Then now as a Christian child who you basically always locked behind the gate, now you're in church and you hear it's a foretaste of heaven. And I remember when people get married, and I see them coming out to social, I'm like, why they don't stay home and have sex, Why come to social when you can go to heaven? And then, and then now, then now, as many young ladies, you hear it's a foretaste of heaven, and you get married, and it's 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, and you can't get heaven all now, and you're wondering, what is happening, and then you just, you feel deceived because you're like, there's no heaven in this, And here is it, this man really acting like a dog, so to speak, because you feel as if you just have this man who you have to keep on service, and then you have the babies, and then you're just really frustrated, and you feel as if this whole thing is just a deception. What really is sex?
Oh, wow. What really is sex? Well, I want to pull on some things that were said before, because one of the things I want us to guard against, I don't want anyone who is listening to our program who finds themselves on the wrong side of the road, so to speak, to feel like all is lost. Mm-hmm. Because we understand that God's ideal is that each person, man and woman, should remain pure until they get married and they come together in that very holistic way. Yeah. However, this is a real world, and Satan is on the prowl, and some of us get caught.
Yeah.
And because we don't talk about sex, we are coming out of an era where sex is very taboo and hush and so on. A lot of our young people meet up on these emotions ill-equipped, and so things happen that are not supposed to happen. And I just want to put it out there to all the young people that are listening, that if you have engaged in sexual relations and you're not yet married and you're sitting down feeling sorry for yourself and you feel guilty about it, God will forgive you.
Yeah.
You can stop it
Yeah.
now and make a decision to wait until God gives you that partner. You can reclaim your chastity from God and go into your marriage relationship free of the past and have just as wonderful an experience as anybody who had never had sex before. God is able to do that for you. It is just unfortunate that some of our young people end up this way because of how sex is presented to them. But what really is sex? And those of us who are married could speak about it. I mean, we could write books and stuff like that. But let me tell you, from a spiritual standpoint, sex is God's way of allowing two people, two distinct people, man and woman, to come together and to bond. And it's bonding on so many different levels. It's a physical bonding, it's an emotional bonding, it's a spiritual bonding. And when that activity produces a child, it's a whole different level of bonding, because now you have a whole other physical manifestation of your love for each other that was expressed in this sexual act. And so I want our young ladies especially to understand that God's idea of sex is that it is something awesome and wonderful. And the reason why he puts the barrier around it to say be married is because it is so awesome that it really can only happen the way God wants it to happen inside of that kind of commitment.
And also to as a way of preserving the two individuals that are involved. Like you said, it is emotional and it is also spiritual. It is really our own evidence of what the Trinity is.
Right.
Because it's like you're married, and yes, the pastor makes a proclamation that the two becomes one, but it is actually in having sex that you experience this oneness or this coming together, and you're basically vulnerable. If it is not expressed in the correct way, you find that the person lives with you, and it's not a joke,
It's
and
true.
you are living with
a
that
part of
person.
them.
With almost everything,
Yes.
because you've taken that person's emotion, you've taken that person's loyalty, you've taken that person's openness, everything, they've given it to you as a gift. And you have accepted it, right? And so if it is not done within the right context, you can see why it would cause such
So much damage.
right, and just this disoriented feeling that can come with it. However, and I don't want to seem that I'm jumping ahead, but I'm just gonna quickly make the point that outside of that though, within the right context, it can still have that effect as well, the disoriented feeling, if there are other things that are not working out, like communication is not right. And I want to add that whereas Sherlan said earlier that a penis and a vagina, important in the whole process, right? And I'm saying that but sex begins long before those two come together. It's in the mind, the thoughts that you think, the words that are said, the way you feel, all of that conjure up from in the head. Understand what I'm saying? So basically, when those two body parts meet or whatever, it's really like more of a climax of whatever. So if you are not in the right type frame of mind, if you do not really want to be there, even married, this can be a very traumatic and awful experience.
That is true.
I actually wanted to add to that, and I think the Bible is very clear on what instructions are given, because the Bible says the wife is supposed to submit to the husband, but the husband also has a role. He has to love his wife. And for you to actually submit, you actually need to have a husband that loves you. And I would say vice versa. So if my husband is to submit to me, I also have to love. The physical act, you want that to happen. But if the emotional act isn't there, if you're not loving each other, then actually what he may be doing is, in your mind, it's almost like he's raping you, because you're actually just servicing, you're just laying there, you're just taking it, and him just a take it, and whatever the case is, but there isn't an actual submission, there isn't real love. And the word that we hear made a lot of times, there isn't love making,
right?
It's just pure sex, it's
physiological,
just
mechanical,
physical, and you just do something and him done. And I think that's something that needs to come out in our church, because that's also a negative. In our own churches, we do see where individuals may just get married and he just has sex and she just has sex, but there is no love, and so the act is actually something that doesn't, it's not a,
It's
you
not
don't reach
pleasurable.
heaven because
No foretaste of
there
heaven.
are no foretaste of heaven, because actually the process is just a physical, just a do just like the dog them, and technically all that comes out of the process is a child, and that's all you think it is, when it needs to be a higher level. So I think that's a negative that we have to look at as well, that is not just God's ideal. It's not just to make a child, but it's actually, Songs of Solomon, when he talks about all of these pleasuring, that is what he wants you to do. You want to enjoy that, and that's what you want to look forward to when you're getting married.
Yes.
But as we shared, in a perfect world, that would be the case, but in our current world, that is not the case. And so we have to teach our brothers and sisters in the faith that this is something that you can aspire to, and you can get there with prayer, with fasting, and also communication, understanding your spouse when you get to that point, that it can be beautiful.
But before you even get to your spouse, I think the family, parents have a role to play in how our young people approach sex and how they are prepared for meeting that person who is going to be your partner and getting into the act even when you're married. Because many times young people are made to feel that when you're getting married, you're not supposed to express that you are interested in having sex. And your desire for sex is seen as something bad and sinful. And many of our young women especially are made to feel that if you have sexual desires for somebody, or you have sexual desires generally, that you're sinful and you're not spiritual enough and all of that. And I think our church, but more so our parents, need to sit with their children, male and female, and have them understand that having sexual desires is natural. It is of God. It just needs to be managed the way God advises. So even when we see our young people dating, we have to let them understand that if you're getting to the point where you're serious about getting married, you want to get married, the counseling, the courting, you're engaged now, there have to be conversations about sex. Right, yes. We have to connect that way. If you don't have a conversation about sex and you say you're getting married, you're not ready to get married. Because we live in a world where everybody is expected to be a superstar in bed. But at the same time, you're expected to be virginal on the outside. And we don't face up to it and deal with it like it's a real thing, like it's a part of life, like this is something that God wants us to do, and we have to prepare ourselves to do it and do it properly. And I wish we would get to the place in our church where our young people would be properly equipped to get into this space and to do the thing properly so that they can have a fulfilling experience.
Yes, what I would want to know though, what if it is that you guys are married and one of the partner doesn't have much sex drive, the sex drive is low? That is another problem, What can those person do about it?
Or if it's too high.
It's too high.
Well, if it's not a physiological thing that a doctor has to deal with, say it's emotional. We're coming to the point of one of the negatives out there about sex is that in order for sex to be beautiful and enjoyable, one person has to be advanced above the other, right? And if we should accept that, then we are throwing down God's ideal, where you are to be equal, where we are expecting that God's ideal is that two persons who has never experienced sex before, that's how it was in the Garden of Eden, should come together. And that would be the union that brings them together. Now, what I've realized, as I stated before, about the holistic approach about sexuality, if sex was just physiological, as Kimberly spoke to, then the experience would come in, where you would need somebody who go to Hollywood and learn the camera tricks, marrying somebody who don't have a clue. But because sex is not just physiological, it's not just the actual mechanism of coming together, then the whole sex drive will be under control there, because sex is actually something that results, as she said, as a result of a build-up of emotional work. If you notice, Kay Kuzma in her book, Fit Forever, Devotional Guide, she's talking about the sexual software, where a woman will give sex as a result of her emotional needs being fulfilled. So a man is very mechanical. A man can see you and just have sexual intercourse with you and it's no big deal, right? While a woman has to have her emotion fulfilled. And Hollywood knows this. That is why in their movies, the boss and the secretary, the helper and the man of the home, if you notice, it's people who share space that eventually end up in the movie having sexual intercourse. Because once you fulfill a woman's emotional need, once you listen to her, once you feel as if you have heard her and you have loved her, and she's safe with you automatically, it doesn't take much for her to arouse herself. The doctor and his patient, she will just give in, and a man will have, once he's healthy, and normal, his demand will be greater than the supply. That goes without saying, right? So it's a whole emotional, and that is why I just really enjoyed what Kimberly said about marriage. Because of how sex involves giving up not just your physical, but your emotional, it can't happen on a one-off. It has to happen in a place where it's secure, in a place that provides for it to happen consistently, where you're fully loved. And one of the things is that you go out in the open and you feel so special because only one person knows
that about you.
Right. And it's just awesome to know that nobody knows him or her in that way. And when that is so, you find that a lot of things where the drive is too much or too less is taken care of, because more than how I want to be fulfilled, I have to think about this person's emotional needs. And so if my wife is not happy today, as great a need as I feel, I can wait, because I value her as a person. I value how she's feeling more than how I need to be fulfilled. And we need to remember that sex is not food. There are persons who go to their grave who have never experienced it, and that's not the cause of death, So it's something that you can, control.
Yes.
And that's just important. And I listen to you ladies, and I really wish I had this early on in my life, because then you would put it in perspective to say, more than how this needs to be done, it needs an environment to protect it.
You have just listened to part 1 of a 2-part program. Join us next time as we continue our discussions. Thanks for listening to The Purple Door. This podcast is made possible by the Women's Ministry Department of the Central Jamaica Conference for listeners like you. Visit them at centralja.org. Like The Purple Door on Facebook and Instagram, and leave your comments and questions. And remember to subscribe so you never miss a show.
Join us next week for another great discussion. Until then, be blessed.